Welcome to the Vitality Coach Podcast with the Mojo Maker and host, Nikki Fogden-Moore, the Vitality Expert. Dedicated to helping you be the CEO of your business and your life with special industry and life-leading guests, top tips on how you could create that magical blend of healthy, wealthy, and wise for CEOs, entrepreneurs, founders, and people who do things with life.
Hi guys, welcome back to the Mojo Maker podcast, where I get to interview incredible visionary people who do things with life. Remember, I don't do hope projects. So today I have managed to second from way down south the very effervescent and extremely intelligent Steve Tighe. Steve has a silent G in his name, by the way, so you'll find it as Tighe if you're going to search his name on the internet, and so you should be, because this man is considered a visionary in his field. And also, he's not just about science and numbers, he's about planning what are we doing in our future and how can we get the best practice to declutter all the information that has gone into this world to ensure we're high-performing companies, and as individuals, we have a really great way to navigate for seamless success. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Steve and welcome you to the show.
Well, thanks, Nikki. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and I know that was making you a bit nervous because we were like having several attempts at coffee. So we've both got a beautiful, delicious cup of coffee.
And I think you've done a great job, to be honest. It did take a lot of effort, though.
Yeah, well, that's because we ran out of milk, so we had to.
It happens.
But those sorts of things don't stress us out. So, Steve, for those people that aren't watching us sip coffee while they're actually listening to this podcast, driving somewhere on the treadmill, it's a real privilege to have you make some time. You've just come off the back of your book launch. What is your quick bio intro in official terms before I give the dictionary questions?
Yeah, sure. Well, I introduced myself as a strategist, a strategic designer. So I design strategies for organisations, but they tend to be long-term strategies. So tend to be a minimum of 5 years, but most likely kind of 10-year strategies. And I think the reason that organisations prefer that kind of 10-year horizon is it enables them with enough time to actually transform what they do, how they do it, and even who they are. And I think that transformation is essential in what is a changing and volatile business environment.
And you had a Foster's background, so we have a co-friend, Mark Trilson.
Yes.
And you're both pioneering in your own way now, so they must breed them great there. What I love about your message when I first met you on the Central Coast was your undeniable mission to help companies be much more productive with the information they have and look at things from a completely different perspective.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And so look, just to give you a bit of background on my relationship with information, if you like. So I started at Foster's in 1995, which is a long time ago now. And I tend to think that period probably beginning in the early 90s and certainly continuing up to today. If anything has got worse, we're talking about predictive analytics and so forth. I think if you throw an umbrella over that period of time, the last 30 years, it's almost like we've existed in the information age. And organisations have been on this quest to accumulate more and more data and information in that quest for a competitive edge. And so I've been a part of that whole zeitgeist, if you like. And as I said, I think organisations are still caught up in that. So I started at Foster's in a market research position, and I worked my way up to the point where I was probably the senior market analyst in the organisation, without a doubt. So supporting the sales vice president, the marketing vice president. And so in that first 8-year period, nobody would have done more market analysis in the 150-year history of that organisation. And so I was very much in tune with what was available and also how that information was used, and certainly what wasn't used. And so it was through that kind of close relationship that I saw the weaknesses in information and how companies use it. And I think the weaknesses in traditional sources of data, if you like, are that often it's syndicated data. So the information that you're receiving, and we're competitors, the information you receive is the same information I receive on exactly the same day from the same supplier. So the winner in that situation is the supplier of the data. And you see that with companies that provide, so we're at Foster's and we're getting the same information as Coca-Cola
So from McKinsey or something, etc.
Exactly. Some external support. So
Yeah.
And so they've done really well in that context.
Well, they've made their life easier because they could just batch dispatch, right?
Spot on. So on the 15th of each month, pretty much market analyst in each of those companies gets the same email in their inbox. There you go. However,
so why did no one ever ask a question and go, are we getting something different? Did anyone do that? Or did they just sort of accept that was just the norm?
I think it's accepted as the norm. I think there's a lack of knowledge around, but how would we generate our own? What do we do?
But that starts with curiosity, Steve. So I think a lot of people tick boxes because they know they need the information and it satisfies that need, but they don't necessarily have a real desire to use it. So when you have a desire to use that information, you become more curious. And I'm probably preempting your point too.
Look, I think you're right about that. So, we were spending multi-million dollars per year. So would our competitors. And 90% of that information goes unused.
Yeah.
Okay. And I worked with having left Foster's in the late 2000s, I worked for another multinational, just did a project for them for about 6 months. And, I spoke to the marketing director and I said, tell me how you use information. And he goes, we don't use what we have, but they always want more. And I think that desire for more is something that permeates every organisation. That what else can we accumulate as if that'll solve their problem.
I totally agree. And on that point, I just think, if anyone's listening to this right now, I would urge you to think, how do you want to receive this podcast information? Because this isn't just an organizational issue. This is actually an individual issue. We're pushed as consumers and individuals from the moment you get out of your house or you wake up, we're bombarded with information. So whether or not we want to receive it is a different discussion. And the value of information is something you're speaking about from a company perspective. But we have an individual birthright to go, do I want to receive this and how do I get rid of what I don't need?
Yeah.
So when you started talking at Foster's and started asking questions, you added value to the data you're receiving because you could use it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was a very curious person. And so I tended to try to look at the information differently because I was driven by competition. So my desire was, what can I find that'll help us as an organisation against our competitors? And that curiosity and desire to be competitive led me to the fundamental question, which has dictated the direction of my life since, which was in December 2003, I asked, how do you get ahead of trends? Okay. Yeah. So a trend is basically past behaviour, and a forecast is an extrapolation of that trend. And organisations love trends, right? And we all innovate to the latest trend, and you need to innovate because essentially a trend represents a
movement,
a fundamental shift in behaviour.
Exactly.
Okay, a sustained shift. So if you don't shift with it, you lose relevance. Okay, so that's the positive. The deceptive element of trends is twofold. One, they don't really give you a competitive advantage because a trend by its very nature is visible. You can measure it. And as I said, if you can, so can everyone else. But the really deceptive element of trends is that because they are an extrapolation of the past, they don't forewarn you of discontinuities. So when I asked the question, how do you get ahead of trends, what I was really asking was, how do we develop the capacity, the capability to anticipate and prepare for important discontinuities before they occur? Now I think that is the fundamental challenge.
So you're talking about a change in trends, not the trend.
Exactly.
You're talking about that corner.
Where's the shift? Exactly. Yeah. And that's the real power, I think.
That's forecasting what's the next thing to happen.
Exactly. So now, once you ask that question, so my interest is not necessarily in what is already kind of underway. Where's the next shift?
Yeah, and so you're using, an element of vision, of analytics, of creativity, of curiosity.
Creativity is key, yeah.
And absolutely. Then also, and I think, by the way, I just want to say that all this information is available on Thinking Strategy in Steve Tighe's new book, which we're actually going to, he's extrapolating all his wisdom for us today, but it's in here. But I think the biggest thing for people is overwhelmed while you're talking about this because they're going, yes, but then what's next? So in all your years of knowledge that have taken you from 1995 and being, the curious cat, I'm sure you had a bit of pushback when you started to ask the suppliers for more specific information and for forecast. How did that work for you?
Well, I think, as I said, I asked the question, how do you get ahead of trends? It led me to just simply Google the word foresight, and lo and behold, there was a institute down the road, Swinburne University, which actually taught a master's in strategic foresight.
Ooh.
Okay. Now, there's probably...
Did you go do that?
Absolutely, I did. There's probably 3 of those in the world, and one of them's 4 kilometres down the road. So very fortunate.
Well, I call that fate and serendipity.
As I said, that question, how do you get ahead, has really dictated the direction of my life. And so I started the Masters in March. It's a 3-year Masters, of course. In May 2004, I wrote to the CEO. I said, look, we should have a foresight manager, because I instantly recognised the value of having that capability. And he wrote back and said, I agree, you're it. So I'd been studying 8 weeks. I had no idea what it actually entailed. And I think this it goes back to your point about being overwhelmed, because I started work in June 2004, and I remember clearly I was sitting at my desk. So my role was essentially, what could Australia look like in 10 years' time? What are the fundamental wants, needs and attitudes of people in that society? And what does it mean for us as a beverage company? So quite grand kind of roles. And I remember sitting down day one at my desk and just feeling completely overwhelmed with what could happen. I mean, I didn't have the skills to decipher what was important and what wasn't. And that, to me, the next 10 years or the future just appeared as this vast, unknowable black hole. And one of the keys to actually unlocking that black hole, if you like, or demystifying the future, is to let go of dependence on data and information. And
that's control, isn't it?
That's critical.
Yeah. So I just want to pause you on the second of vision and thinking big, because I particularly love this idea that in order to adult in the world and really thrive, we need to be curious. So whenever people are very afraid of change, I can remember going, all the kids at school now are on digital. They can't handwrite anymore. And I was thinking my parents must have said the same thing. And, we're a society that there's so much going on. I just want to touch on virtual working spaces. I was at KPMG the other day, just such a dynamic organisation. We're talking about how do we make people feel at home, because there's so much change and so much information that nobody's anchored anymore. So you have a gift that curiosity empowers you, right? So it's a good feeling. But a lot of people that overwhelm, without the analytical way to go, this is an opportunity, actually get very afraid of the unknown.
Yep.
And companies get afraid of the unknown because it makes them feel vulnerable.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. And I think a bit of that vulnerability comes from, your expertise is in doing, what you know today and
so
what you do today.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
So I think one of the things with change that people tend to avoid, if you like, or a bit afraid of it, is they don't know what to change to, or they don't have the capabilities to. So,
but why do we need to know? Why don't once we just ask one question, another door opens?
No, I can see your angle there, but I guess a lot of people are afraid. It's the whole question. A bird in the hand is worth more than in the bush.
Well, because that's why people stay in organisational stagnation and relationship stagnation, because better the devil you know than the devil you don't, because you're free falling. Yeah. But you're saying you don't need to free fall because there is a matrix in which you can design forecasting or to give yourself a roadmap.
Well, I think it's always easier to change when you know what you're changing to. What you step out of that door, but you know what's behind door number 2 or whatever it may be. I think when you don't know what is behind that door, or is anything behind that door at all, that's when people perhaps get a bit...
and commercially, it's like moving house. People want to know that if they're going to commercially be viable, they have to make conscious decisions. They can't just wing it. So you've gone from doing your Masters and being head of foresight at Foster's and generating more of an intellectual capability around the space to being a champion of change now, a champion of unknown.
Yeah, and so I think there's obviously an acceptance that the world is uncertain and it's always shifting, and I think what holds organisations back more is not necessarily that they're afraid of change, is that they don't know how to think about change effectively, and by thinking I mean how to foresee it and how to prepare for it, and I think that's really the space that I try to work in, to help them to foresee how their business environment could shift. More importantly, what that shift means for them, and then what they need to do or what they could do to to prosper in those. So you're really saying, look, the future looks like these 3 doors. Behind door number 1 is this type of environment. Door number 2 is this. And this is what you need to do using your to prosper behind each door.
Yeah.
So you're really kind of stripping away, I think, that fear of perhaps the unknown.
So let's just talk about a couple of roadblocks commercially for organisations that are medium to large to enterprise that understand the importance of this, but are probably like stuck in the amount of information they have to wade through. And then there's also, we've invested so much in this data.
Yeah.
So there's 3 roadblocks that I see working with, scale and automation and, everything that's coming up now for growth and sustainability means you're only as good as the quality of the information that you have.
Yeah.
The first, let's just give everyone listening 3 key basic steps to assess and be empowered to go, here's how you drop the pin before you keep going around in circles. The number 1 thing is, what would you say the first thing to do is when your ears start to get excited about this information, you go, maybe we should be looking at it. What's the first thing companies should do?
Well, I think the first thing companies should do is really start to list, well, what are the factors that if they change would really make a difference to what it is that we do? So I think by that you're really saying, how do we identify and explicitly identify what are the fundamentals that drive our business? And a lot of those fundamentals, organisations and industries take for granted. And let me give you an example about retail. Now, with retail is under attack from a number of different areas. And some people say, well, they're losing sales to online or so forth. And sure, so the online environment is changing, and therefore that would be one factor that you want to start to explore. But some of the fundamentals that have driven performance in the retail environment over the past 30 years has been that consumer desire, that social desire to own and consume more and more. Mm-hmm. Now, many organisations just take that for granted. They just assume that will persist. But I think your starting point for thinking about the future is to identify what are the fundamental drivers of our current and historical business performance. The second question then becomes, which of those drivers are changing or could change?
And I think you've touched on a huge thing culturally in the world. We've been in a minimalist Marie Kondo world, smaller houses, decluttering, because people, there's probably another recession coming up. People are going to be forced to go less is more because it's just like anything. And I think that's what I say with oil and gas. I always sit around the boardroom table with some of my clients and go, why are we surprised that there's going to be peaks and troughs? If you look back from the history of any kind of archetypal industry, that's just nature. People go in peaks and troughs too. So there's always, what's the next move, the next shift? And you can see it already. You don't even have to be a rocket scientist. I know that people are looking for less clothes. We're talking about donating. We're talking about less plastics. We're really trying to have a less is more. So quality and experiences and connectivity. So people they'll be forced to be around their kitchen table more. They'll be forced to socialize more because the spending on credit cards will go down because it's strict. Like there's just everything.
So what you've just articulated is the space I work in, which is really about...
Did I get a high five? Did I do good?
You always do well. But what you've just articulated is a scenario. You say, okay, if this happened, all of a sudden you leapt from decluttering to people spending more time around their kitchen table, okay? That was just a scenario. So it's kind of a secondary or tertiary kind of outcome. And that's really the space that I like to work in. So, okay, so what is changing? Yeah. And you articulate, okay, people's attitudes towards consuming and owning are changing. Okay, let's take that as a key driver, because if I'm in the business where people consuming and owning stuff is to my benefit, then that's a shift that's really important to me. And so you want to just kind of articulate and say, okay, well, what would happen if that trend took off?
So the first step we said is articulate the fundamentals of your business. And might I add here, like any personal brand as an individual, we don't actually really, if I look back at what I deliver and my statement from day dot, it's never changed. Maybe the way in which you deliver and the area we deliver it in, but the mission behind it, I think as organizations, they lose sight of their roots.
Spot on.
So the delivery of how they get their product or their service across, it can fit a changing market, but their core values.
You have just highlighted an absolute key point.
I feel like I get a gold star from you. Well, your face is just lit up.
You've obviously...
this is just how I work.
Well, you're absolutely true. So let's go to your mission, your purpose, whatever your core does not change. But to enable you... So what you do, how you do it, can change. That
And
has
who
to
you
change.
do it with. Yeah.
And who you do it with, etc. That has to change to fit the changing context. However, you need that. It all stems from your sense of identity. So kind of how you
like
see
McDonald's.
yourself. Exactly. So I think with the whole point to allow you to adapt is your sense of identity must be broad enough.
So
okay?
that foundational aspect is number one.
Must be broad.
The second thing that you want companies to think about, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I can't help myself, is that they have to let go of the ties of preceded data they've invested in. It's almost like whatever got you to this point, okay, line in the sand, what's the best thing for us moving forward?
Spot on. Yeah. And so I think always think in terms of context. Context determines everything. So, and that's why I mean, understand, let's say you're a business, look back over the past 10 years. What was the context that allowed us to perform and to operate and to deliver the results that it did? Now, that context is always fluent. It's fluid. So, as I said, what are the fundamentals of our business? Which of those fundamentals are changing or could change? Because they will now determine a different operating context for the next 10 years. And therefore, we need to now adapt what it is that we do and how we do it, who we do it with, to remain successful or to achieve our goals over that next period. Because within a different context, what we did, is unlikely to be as successful, etc.
So your landscape changes, so the old rules of engagement are probably no longer
Your
there.
core doesn't change, as you said. At your core, you're still who you are, but how you operate and how you deliver what you do changes because of the changing context.
And bringing that back to retail, like the valet, I work with Centre Group, with Westfield a lot. They're a terrific company to work with, very dynamic and they're global, but that's all about experiences and we need that as humans. So I think it's not, the other thing I want to touch on is that I feel people are so short term about business when really an organization that's starting to think we want to be around in 10 years time without fear about that means you have to be in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
But anyone listening to this, if you run a small business, if you're consultants and coaches like Steve and myself, why are you not thinking the real value is in what you do anyway? So why can't it be a 10? Where do you want to be in 10 years? Why don't you start getting curious instead of going, well, that didn't work out? So I think we have these short-term fight or flight matrices, whereas real businesses ride the storm. And that's why I love GFC sometimes, because the quality always lasts,
Look, and I think you've hit on a really valuable point there as well. Extending your thinking. And I think that extension goes time-wise, so out in front of you. So, a 10-year horizon is better than a 5-year horizon, is better than a 1-year horizon,
gets me so
etc.
excited.
And then extending your thinking outside of your industry. So it's kind of broad as well as kind of a longer horizon. And by taking that longer horizon, you're instantly now taking into account much more variables that could affect your business as opposed to kind of that short-term operational variables.
And I just love this if you come back to an organization as an individual, just like any person. And I think when people jump from one thing to the other because it's the latest craze, that's sometimes what companies do rather than always going, what is our decision-making matrix for our actions? Because does it fit our values? Does it fit our current service offer? Does it fit our future plans? And what do we really want? And I think that's really beautiful. You've spoken about 3 core things. Know your foundations. Why are you in business? McDonald's still sell burgers. They might have coffee and chicken wraps and fruit sundaes, but they're a burger house. And they don't try and run away from that.
Understanding your why is critical. And I think it's got to be a broad sense. So, and a broad sense of identity allows you to adapt. So what you are, you're true to your heritage, but you're relevant to the future. And that's a key. When you have a narrow sense of identity, okay, you can foresee all the change in the world. But if you have that narrow sense of identity, then you say, well, look, that's all well and good, but how is it relevant to us? We sell computers. And so I think by having that broad sense of identity, you can pick the relevance in change.
So, this is such a big topic. I wish we could do 7 different episodes, but I promised listeners, because we did a little blast out, that we'd try and keep our podcast to 20 minutes, because I know a lot of you are time poor and we really want to use that effectively. But what I will say is this is just one of many chats with Steve, because it's definitely the space that I work in. If you want to find out more about Steve, I'm going to put all the links. But just to wrap up, whatever size of your organization, I think whatever you are, wherever you are in life, this is even for your family. Like I always say to my clients, you put time into your business plan, but have you put the same time into your life plan? When did you last look at what does life look like? And when do we last be curious? So if you are scared of the future, or if you don't know your ins and outs, you don't know your budgets and your plans and what your core offering is, I encourage you to, after this podcast, to sit down and go, what are my foundations? What are the foundations of our corporate legacy, of our family legacy, of me as an individual? Because we all have a ripple effect. We're part of this change. And I think if you and I, throughout our work, can empower people to embrace and feel that they're part of it rather than afraid of it. The only thing I'd like to loop back on for you, Steve, is what is one piece of advice that you give to organizations that have invested so heavily in data, yet 90% of it is defunct?
I think just to rethink how you think about data, and it's not the lifeline that I think at the moment it does kind of perform that role of a lifeline. We feel comfortable and we have a sense of comfort that we have access to this. It is a bit of a justifier, and often it's used to put out fires internally. I think that in terms of information, the great turning point for me was to realise that when it comes to thinking about discontinuities, okay, and it's the discontinuities that matter because they're the ones that have the chance of either impacting your organisation in a positive sense or a negative sense, okay? So the discontinuities don't come along too often, but when they do, you want to drive them if you can, exploit them if you can, and certainly avoid them if they're not in your interest. So if trends and historical data don't necessarily give an insight into future discontinuities, I think the most important tip I can give you is that understanding processes for change, how does change actually occur, is much more important than accumulating endless streams of historical data or subscribing to industry trends and so forth, because they won't necessarily give you any indication about what's actually coming at you that is strategically significant.
No, they'll probably reconfirm some decisions you made a while back.
Exactly.
And they'll go, well, you know what, we did that marketing campaign didn't work, but there we can see why, or whatever else. So it's like a nice... So I have got this analogy that the rear view mirror is smaller for a reason, and the windscreen is bigger, right? So in organizations, I say always learn, regroup, and refine by looking back, but spend this amount of time looking back and this amount of time with a peripheral vision going, hey, what else is out there? Yeah. There are certain types of people that are really good at this. So let's talk about identifying inside an organization, just as we wrap up, the curious minds that can articulate what to do next. Because a lot of visionary people know what it looks like in their head, but actually articulating that vision and putting it into something that is useful for people to work with. Yeah. There's a real art to doing that. I mean, you've done it. How do people find unicorns inside their organization that can assist and be foresight managers for their own company?
Well, look, I think those unicorns exist everywhere. And I think one of the challenges has been the way we think about strategy, which is really what we're talking about. And I think historically, strategy has been treated as if it's this kind of special thing that only the best and brightest can do, okay? And traditionally, it's been kind of middle-aged men in dark suits behind closed doors, and they develop a strategy, they emerge from behind the closed doors, and they deliver the strategy to the organisation, and they say, we've done the thinking for you, now you go and implement, okay? So the best and brightest or managerial leaders do not have a monopoly on brilliance. And I tend to think you need to take a collaborative approach to strategy development. And by taking a collaborative approach, my philosophy is involve as many people in the strategy process, involve as many people as is practical. So for some, that might be 15 people. For others, it could be organisationally wide, 90 people, okay? So whatever's practical for you. And I think by doing that, what you do is unlock the entrepreneurial talent that exists amongst every person and amongst the entire organisation. And it's really interesting because in the workshops I do, you hear ideas and your thought might be, I never really saw that angle, or that doesn't make sense. And then lo and behold, a couple of years later, you look back and say, I tell you what, that person was spot on. So nobody, the future is very democratic. And if you think about the long-term future, let's talk about 2030. There's no facts about 2030. And so if there's no facts about 2030, there can be no experts about 2030. So all of a sudden, when you're thinking about the future, regardless of whatever level you're on within the organisation, everybody's at exactly the same level. Therefore, it's a democratic process, and every person's idea is really as valid as each other's. And so my philosophy there, in terms of finding those unicorns or whatever, is to develop the process input, to implement the processes that involve as many people as is practical. And I think that's how you get a diversity of opinion. But more importantly, I think you're giving people a forum to actually express those views. And I think what I've found, and I'm sure what everyone will find, is that people relish that opportunity to talk and to be involved about conversations about social change or about how they see the future and so forth.
Yeah.
So that lifting up from kind of the operational conversation to much more of a kind
holistic,
of... Yeah, absolutely. And people really enjoy that.
And I think the thing is, you can't just do it for hearsay. As a leader, you have to, I would say, do less of those moments and collate the information, then demonstrate that it's been acknowledged, because at that point, no idea is a bad idea. So we have to, I call it the boomerang effect. You have to hold a forum and then display the results and thank everyone, but not hold several of them. Just be really purposeful. So less is more. Quality forums, purpose behind it, share your information and recognize people's input. Let them know they've been heard. Whatever we're talking about here, the greatest thing you can ever give someone is significance. And that's what we're really talking about. Your company is significant. You're significant. This book is significant. So Steve Tighe on rethinking strategy. You can't forecast 2030 and say you're an expert because there are no facts on it. Something I didn't know, but it's the truth. So if anyone calls himself an expert on 2030, just shoot them to this podcast. Steve, thank you very much. We've talked about clear foundations, being curious about the future, finding unicorns inside the organization, democratic thinking, that this is basically an opportunity for everyone to add value because everyone has vision, and that organizations need to rethink how they use data and the questions they place around it. Rear view vision is a smaller one. Looking forward means actually asking more questions.
Yeah, I think so. You're spot on.
Yeah. So you can hear more about Steve by getting the show notes on thevitalitycoach.com.au. This will be episode, I think, 106, 107. And we want to get out as fast as possible so we can have you geared up for organizational change in the best way possible. I'll also put the contact details down if you want to have Steve as speaker. He is very, very interesting when he's not been interrupted by me and has some real insights. And first and foremost, I think never shy away from intellect and be curious yourselves. The book is available as well. Steve, one last mantra of yours at the moment that propels you forward. We're going to have another interview about you personally. But what's one tiny little mantra you could leave everyone with this episode today?
Gee, that's a big way to finish there.
I like to finish grand.
Look, I think you're right. Just to encourage that intellectual curiosity, and I like to think of myself as intellectually curious, and I think that's one of the keys to success within any organisation, or even as an individual, to maintain that intellectual curiosity. So that's probably one of the key drivers of my life.
I love that. So always be curious, people, and remember that every single conversation you have could be something that's incredibly insightful, even if it's around the dinner table with your children. We don't know it all. Quantum physics tells us that. So keep an open mind. Remember, stay healthy, wealthy, and wise. You are absolutely in the driver's seat of your life. On this show, we don't do hope projects, but we do give you the tools to navigate for seamless success. So tune in. Mojo Maker is on Spotify, iTunes, and everywhere else. And it's a pleasure to have incredible guests like Steve. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Cheers.
Have a great day, guys, and we'd love your feedback and reviews. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. As always, we'd love your review on iTunes, or you can jump online to thevitalitycoach.com.au for more from Nikki, to sign up for the Monday Mojo and the Vitality Coach TV on YouTube.